Speaker, the Honourable Lady is right to raise this issue. We have the independent review into children's social care led by Josh McAllister, and of course I'd be very happy to meet the Honourable Lady to discuss this important issue further.
Well, final question, Dr Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I recently met with my school leaders and heard how, on recent inspections by Ofsted, there had been no account taken of staff absence due to COVID. Can my honourable friend confirm that Ofsted should take into account COVID impacts when inspecting and set this out in writing?
I can say to my honourable friend, having discussed this with Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, I know that she does take into account these impacts, and Ofsted are offering deferrals to schools which are facing particularly high levels of staff absence. But I'd be happy to meet him to discuss a case to which he refers.
Before we move on to the first statement, I would like to assure the House, following the comments made at the start of questions, I tell you, I don't think it's quite appropriate with what I'm going to say. You ought to be ashamed. I really do. Before we move on to the first statement, I would like to assure the House, following the comments made at the start of questions, that there will be an opportunity to pay tribute to our friend and colleague, the late Jack Dromey. And that will take place on Wednesday. I'm sure honourable and right honourable members will welcome the opportunity to pay tribute at that point. I should inform the House that, given the brief period of time available to review the report, I shall be allowing the leaders of the opposition a little longer to question the Prime Minister than is usually the case, and I'm sure the Prime Minister may wish a little longer as well at the beginning. I now come to the statement. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, with your permission, I would like to make a statement. And first, I want to express my deepest gratitude to Sue Gray and all the people who have contributed to this report, which I have placed in the library of this House and which the Government has published in full today for everyone to read. I will address its findings in this statement, but firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone. We asked people across this country to make the most extraordinary sacrifices, not to meet loved ones, not to visit relatives before they died. And I understand the anger that people feel. But, Mr Speaker, it isn't enough to say sorry. This is a moment when we must look at ourselves in the mirror and we must learn. And while the Metropolitan Police must yet complete their investigation, and that means there are no details of specific events in Sue Gray's report, I, of course, accept Sue Gray's general findings in full. And above all, her recommendation that we must learn from these events and act now. With respect to the events under police investigation, she says, and I quote, "No conclusions should be drawn or inferences made from this other than it is now for the police to consider the relevant material in relation to those incidents." But more broadly, she finds that there is significant learning to be drawn from these events, which must be addressed immediately across government. This does not need to wait for the police investigations to be concluded. That is why we are making changes now to the way Downing Street and the Cabinet Office run, so that we can get on with the job that I was elected to do, Mr Speaker, and the job that this government was elected to do. First, it is time to sort out what Sue Gray rightly calls the fragmented and complicated leadership structures of Downing Street, which she says have not evolved sufficiently to meet the demands of the expansion of Number 10. And we will do that, including by creating an Office of the Prime Minister with a permanent secretary to lead Number 10. Second, Mr Speaker, it is clear from Sue Gray's report that it is time not just to review the Civil Service and Special Advisor codes of conduct wherever necessary to ensure that they take account of Sue Gray's recommendations, but also to make sure that those codes are properly enforced. And third, I will be saying more in the coming days about the steps we will take to improve the Number 10 operation and the work of the Cabinet Office, to strengthen Cabinet government, and to improve the vital connection between Number 10 and Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I get it and I will fix it. And I want to say to the people of this country, I know what the issue is. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes. It's whether this government can be trusted to deliver. And I say, Mr. Speaker, yes, we can be trusted. Yes, we can be trusted to deliver. We said that we would get Brexit done, Mr. Speaker, and we did. And we're setting up free ports around the whole United Kingdom. I've been to one of them today, which is creating tens of thousands of new jobs, Mr. Speaker. We said we would get this country through COVID, and we did. We delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe and the fastest booster programme of any major economy, so that we've been able to restore people's freedoms faster than any comparable economy. And at the same time, we've been cutting crime by 14%, building 40 new hospitals and rolling out gigabit broadband, Mr. Speaker, and delivering all the promises of our 2019 agenda so that we have the fastest economic growth of the G7. We have shown that we have done things that people thought were impossible, Mr. Speaker, and that we can deliver for the British people. Mr. Speaker, I remind the benches opposite. The reason we're coming out of COVID so fast is at least partly because we doubled the speed of the booster rollout. And I can tell the House and this country that we are going to bring the same energy and commitment to getting on with the job, to delivering for the British people, and to our mission to unite and level up across this country, Mr. Speaker, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call Keir Starmer, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Sue Gray for the diligence and professionalism with which she's carried out her work. It's no fault of hers that she's only been able to produce an update today, not the full report. The Prime Minister repeatedly assured the House that the guidance was followed and the rules were followed. But we now know that 12 cases have reached the threshold for criminal investigation, which I remind the House means that there is evidence of serious and flagrant breaches of lockdown, including the party on the 20th of May 2020, which we know the Prime Minister attended, and the party on the 13th of November 2020 in the Prime Minister's flat. There can be no doubt that the Prime Minister himself is now subject to criminal investigation. The Prime Minister must keep his promise to publish Sue Gray's report in full when it is available, but it is already clear that the report discloses the most damning conclusion possible. Over the last 2 years, the British public have been asked to make the most heart-wrenching sacrifices, a collective trauma, endured by all, enjoyed by none. Funerals have been missed, dying relatives unvisited. Every family has been marked by what we've been through. And revelations about the Prime Minister's behaviour have forced us all to rethink and relive those darkest moments. Many have been overcome by rage, by grief, and even guilt. Guilt that because they stuck to the law, they did not see their parents one last time. Guilt that because they didn't bend the rules, their children went months without seeing friends. Guilt that because they did as they were asked, they didn't go and visit lonely relatives. But people shouldn't feel guilty. They should feel pride in themselves and their country, because by abiding by those rules, they've saved the lives of people they will probably never meet. They have shown the deep public spirit and the love and respect for others that has always characterised this nation at its best. Our national story about COVID is one of a people that stood up when they were tested. But that will be forever tainted by the behaviour of this Conservative Prime Minister. By routinely breaking the rules he set The Prime Minister took us all for fools. He held people sacrificing contempt. He showed himself unfit for office. His desperate denials since he was exposed have only made matters worse. Rather than come clean, every step of the way he's insulted the public's intelligence. And now he's finally fallen back on his usual excuse. It's everybody's fault but his. They go, he stays. Even now, he is hiding behind a police investigation into criminality, into his home and his office. Mr. Speaker, he gleefully treats what should be a mark of shame as a welcome shield. But, Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame. And just as he has done throughout his life, he's damaged everyone and everything around him along the way. His colleagues have spent weeks defending the indefensible, touring the TV studios, parroting his absurd denials, degrading themselves and their offices, fraying the bond of trust between the government.
Order. The member for South Ribble is my neighbour. I expect better from my neighbours. Keir Starmer.
Fraying the bond of trust between the government and the public, eroding our democracy and the rule of law. Margaret Thatcher once said, "The first duty of government is to uphold the law. If it tries to bob and weave and duck around that duty when it's inconvenient, then so will the governed." Mr. Speaker, to govern this country is an honour, not a birthright. It is an act of service to the British people, not the keys to a court to parade to your friends. It requires honesty, integrity and moral authority. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me that this Prime Minister's lack of integrity is somehow priced in, that his behaviour and character don't matter. I have never accepted that, and I never will accept that. Whatever your politics, whichever party you vote for, honesty and decency matters. Our great democracy depends on it, and cherishing and nurturing British democracy is what it means to be patriotic. There are members opposite who know that, and they know the Prime Minister is incapable of it. The question they must now ask themselves is, what are they going to do about it? They can heap their reputations, the reputation of their party, the reputation of this country on the bonfire that is his leadership, or they can spare the country from a Prime Minister totally unworthy of his responsibilities. It is their duty to do so. They know better than anyone how unsuitable he is for high office. Many of them knew in their hearts that we would inevitably come to this one day. And they know that as night follows day, continuing his leadership will mean further misconduct, cover-up and deceit. It is only they that can end this farce. The eyes of the country are upon them. They will be judged by the decisions they take now.
Prime Minister!
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why he said absolutely nothing about the report that was presented by this government and later put in the library of the House earlier on today. That is because, Mr. Speaker, the report does absolutely nothing to substantiate the tissue of nonsense he has just spoken. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, Mr. Speaker, this leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker. He, Mr. Speaker, chose to use this moment. He used this moment, Mr. Speaker, continually to prejudge a police inquiry. That's what he chose to do. He's reached his conclusions about it. I'm not going to reach any conclusions, and he would be entirely wrong to do so. And I direct him again, Mr. Speaker, to what Sue Gray says in her report about the conclusions that can be drawn from her inquiry about what the police may or may not do. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have complete confidence in the police, and I hope that they will be allowed simply to get on with their job. And I don't propose to offer any more commentary about it, and I don't believe that he should either. And I must say to him that what I think the country, with greatest respect to the benches opposite, what I think the country wants us all in this House to focus on is the issues that matter to them. And getting on, Mr. Speaker, with taking this country forward. And Mr. Speaker, today we have delivered yet more Brexit freedoms with a new Freeport in Tilbury, as I said, when he voted 48 times to take this country back into the EU. Mr. Speaker, we have the most open society, most open economy. Mr. Speaker, this is, I think, what people want us to focus on. We have the most open society, most open economy in Europe because of the vaccine rollout, because of the booster rollout. And never forget, Mr. Speaker, that he voted to keep us in the European Medicines Agency, which would have made that impossible. And today, Mr. Speaker, we are standing together with our NATO allies against the potential aggression of Vladimir Putin, when he wanted, not so long ago, to install a Prime Minister, a Labour leader who would actually have abolished NATO, Mr. Speaker. That's what he believes in. Those are his priorities. Well, I can say to him, he can continue with his political opportunism. We are going to get on, and I am going to get on with the job.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The COVID regulations impose significant restrictions on the freedoms of members of the public. They had a right to expect their Prime Minister to have read the rules, to understand the meaning of the rules, and indeed those around him to have done so too, and to set an example in following those rules. What the Gray report does show is that Number 10 Downing Street was not observing the regulations they had imposed on members of the public. So either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to Number 10. Which was it?
Prime Minister!
With respect to my right honourable friend.
It's a very important question. I want to hear the answer, even if other people don't. Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, that is not what the Gray report says. It is not what the Gray report says. But if she, I suggest that she waits to see the conclusion of the inquiry.
I now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say it's a pleasure to follow the former Prime Minister, and perhaps her behaviour in office, like many that went before her, was about dignity, about the importance of the office, of respect, of truthfulness. And the Prime Minister will be well advised to focus on those that have not dishonoured the office like he has done. Mr. Speaker, we stand here today faced with the systematic decimation of public trust in government and the institutions of the state, and at its heart, a Prime Minister being investigated by the police. So here we have it, the long-awaited Sue Gray report. What a farce. It was carefully engineered to be a fact-finding exercise with no conclusions. Now we find it's a fact-finding exercise with no facts. So let's talk facts. The Prime Minister has told the House that all guidance was completely followed. There was no party. COVID rules were followed, and that I believed it was a work event. Nobody believed him then, and nobody believes you now, Prime Minister. That is the crux. No ifs, no buts. He has willfully misled Parliament. It's bad enough.
Order! Inadvertent misled the House would be acceptable. Misled the House is not acceptable. Withdraw inadvertent.
that the Prime Minister inadvertently told the House on the 8th of December that no parties had taken place and then had to admit that they had. It's bad enough, Mr Speaker, that the Prime Minister's personal integrity is in the ditch, but this murky business is tainting everything around it. It is our intention to submit a motion instructing the Prime Minister to publish the Gray report in full. Will the Prime Minister obey an instruction by this House to publish as required? Mr Speaker, amidst allegations of blackmail by Tory whips, the members opposite have been defending the indefensible. Wait for the report, we were told. Well, here it is, and it tells us very little, except it does state that there were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10. It states that some events should not have been allowed to take place. That is the Prime Minister's responsibility. If there is any honour in public life, then he would resign. Where is this? And he laughs. And the Prime Minister laughs. We ought to remind ourselves in this House that 150,000 plus of our citizens have lost their lives. Family members that couldn't be with them. And that is the sight that people will remember. A Prime Minister laughing at our public. I extend the hand of friendship to all those that have sacrificed. I certainly do not extend the hand of friendship to the Prime Minister, who is no friend of mine. Where is the shame? Where is the dignity? Meanwhile, the police investigation will drag on and on. Every moment the Prime Minister stays, trust in government and the rule of law is ebbing away. The litany of rule-breaking, the culture of contempt, the utter disdain for the anguish felt by the public who have sacrificed so much. What the public see is a man who has debased the office of Prime Minister, shrinked responsibility, dogged accountability and blamed his staff at every turn, presided over sleaze and corruption and tainted the very institutions of the state. In short, Mr Speaker, this is a man. Well, they can laugh, but the public know. The public know this is a man they can no longer trust. He has been investigated by the police. He misled the House. He must now resign.
Order. You'll have to withdraw that last comment.
Mr Speaker, I gave the evidence of the 8th of December.
Order. You're going to have to withdraw misled.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has misled the House.
Unless you withdraw, I will have to stop, and that's not good. Just withdraw the words.
I am standing up for my constituents that know that this Prime Minister has lied and misled the House.
Give me the paper. Give me the paper. Inadvertently misled. I'll give you one more chance. As leader of the SNP, I don't want to have to throw you out. I'm going to give you this chance. Please.
Please to power. That man has misled the House.
Shut up. I'm sorry it's come to this, and I'm sorry that the leader of the party has not got the decency to just withdraw those words in order that this debate can be represented by all political leaders. Would you like to inadvertently?
Speaker, if the Prime Minister has inadvertently misled the House, then I will state that.
Right, we're going to leave it at that. Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for withdrawing what he just said, because he was wrong then, and he, I'm afraid, is wrong in his analysis. And I apologise, as I've said, for all the suffering that people have had throughout this pandemic, and for the anger that people feel about what has taken place in Number 10 Downing Street. But I've got to tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that for much of what he said, his best course is simply to wait for the inquiry to be completed.
Can I just say, I take it the Honourable Member has withdrawn it, the Right Honourable Member.
That the Prime Minister may have inadvertently misled the House.
But, order. To help me, to help the House, You withdrawn your earlier comment and replaced it with inadvertently.
It's not my fault if the Prime Minister can't be trusted to tell the truth.
Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, I order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House. From the House.
He's left anyway.
Rivera, it's all right, we don't need to bother. Right, let us move on. Andrew Mitchell.
Does my right honourable friend recall that ever since he joined the party's candidates list 30 years ago, until we got him into number 10, he has enjoyed my full-throated support? But I am deeply concerned by these events, and very concerned indeed by some of the things he has said from that dispatch box and has said to the British public and our constituents. When he kindly invited me to see him 10 days ago, I told him that I thought he should think very carefully about what was now in the best interests of our country and of the Conservative Party. And I have to tell him he no longer enjoys my support.
Mr. Speaker, I must tell respectfully my right honourable friend, great though the admiration is that I have of him, I simply think that he's mistaken in his views, and I urge him to reconsider upon full consideration of the inquiry.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us, and I'm quoting him, I have repeatedly been assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. We now know that 12 of the 16 parties are subject to a police investigation, and that of the remaining 4, the Sue Gray report says that she's seen a serious failure to observe the high standards at number 10. She's seen failures of leadership, failures of judgment, and the Prime Minister thinks this is fine. So just how bad do things have to be before he takes personal responsibility, does what everybody in this country wants him to do, and resign?
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is taking the action that I've described to set up a Prime Minister's department to improve the operation of number 10, and we will be taking further steps, Mr. Speaker, in the days ahead.
Graham Stewart.
Speaker, the inquiry has found there have been serious failings and has suggested there be changes in the way that number 10 is run, and there's a real opportunity now to take forward this new office of the Prime Minister and ensure further improvements are made so that we can carry on delivering. Of course, what the parties opposite hate is the fact that this government will carry on delivering on the things that matter most to people, while also making sure that the governance within number 10 is improved.
I thank my right honourable friend very, very much. I think he's completely right. I do think that the opposition, of course, want to keep their focus trained on this. That's their decision. I think, Mr. Speaker, what the people of this country want us to do is to get on with the job that they want us to do, and that is to serve them, Mr. Speaker, and to stop talking, frankly, about ourselves.
Mr. Speaker, there is no word in the English language for a parent who has lost a child. No equivalent of widow or orphan for that particular horror. It is a loss that is literally beyond words. A loss that hundreds and thousands of parents have tragically experienced during this pandemic. Many had to bury their children alone. Many couldn't be there with them at the end. Meanwhile, number 10 parted. Yep. Does the Prime Minister understand? Does he care about the enormous hurt his actions have caused to bereaved families across our country? Will he finally accept that the only decent thing that he can do now is to resign?
Mr. Speaker, I do care deeply about the hurt that is felt across the country about the suggestion that things were going on in number 10 that were in contravention of the COVID rules. And I understand how deeply people feel about this and how angry that they are. And I've apologised several times, Mr. Speaker. But I must say that I think we should wait for the outcome of the inquiry before jumping to the conclusions that he has. And in the meantime, we should focus on the issues that matter to the British people.
Caroline Notes.
Speaker, the public and this House have been frustrated by having to wait for Sue Gray, wait for the Metropolitan Police, and today the Prime Minister has announced his new office at number 10. Please can you let this House know what specific structures are going to be put in place so that this House can hold it accountable?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that there's a new permanent secretary who will be accountable to me, and we will make sure that the codes of conduct that are applied both to SPADs and to civil servants are properly enforced. And, of course, all of that will be properly communicated to the House, Mr. Speaker. And what I want to see is much better communication and links between number 10 and the entirety of the House of Commons, and we will do that.
Sir George Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, at the local Tesco store in my constituency, a constituent asked me, and it was in a tone more in sorrow than in anger, why doesn't the Prime Minister realise that as every day goes by, he damages the reputation of our country and abroad and around the world? Why, he said, doesn't the Prime Minister realise that? How would he respond to that constituent?
Mr. Speaker, I think the reputation of our country around the world is built on the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, if not in all the major economies. It is built on having the fastest growth, therefore, in the G7, and it is built on our ability to bring our allies together to stand up against Vladimir Putin. That is what the world is focused on, that is what I'm focused on, and that, frankly, is what he should be focused on.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend first of all remind the Leader of the Opposition and the Labour Party that the backbenchers of the Conservative Party need no reminders about how to dispose of a failing leader? And can he also, when he is restructuring number 10, concentrate on the fact that the country wants results? We can't see the point of such a large number 10 superstructure, that it needs to be slimmed down and streamlined. And can I commend his determination to restore cabinet government, and it is on results over the next few months on which he will be judged.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend very much for that, and I think he's entirely right, and I'm more than content to be judged, Mr. Speaker, on the results that we've already delivered and the results that we will deliver. I'm sure that we will be greatly assisted by the reforms of number 10 that I've outlined.
Diane Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anybody who's actually read the Sue Gray report can only wonder what she was made to leave out. Will the Prime Minister give the House an undertaking that as soon as he is able, he will release the full, unredacted report to this House?
Mr. Speaker, Sue Gray has published everything that she can, and I propose that we wait until the conclusion of the inquiry. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, I think it peculiar that the report is being simultaneously hailed as utterly damning, but also condemned for not having enough in it. Mr. Speaker, it can't be both.
Vital Fabricant.
President Truman had on his desk, "The buck stops here." So the Prime Minister was right to apologise for the events that happened in number 10 Downing Street. 2 weeks ago, I reminded Tom Harwood that Tony Blair suggested that there should be an Office of Prime Minister so that it could be governed not from 70 Whitehall, but from the building itself. Could the Prime Minister tell me how he envisions the office will work? Will the Permanent Secretary be based in number 10, controlling what civil servants do in number 10?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, very grateful. I think the House does understand, even if many people outside don't, that Number 10 actually hosts about more than 400 officials on a busy day. They have a huge amount to do, and we need to make sure. No, Mr. Speaker, they're working very hard. That's what they're doing, and we need to make sure that there are proper lines of authority and that we sort out the command structures, and that's what we're doing.
Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whatever the police decide, this update, severely limited as it is, would be enough to persuade any other Prime Minister to resign. This Prime Minister could resign and salvage for himself a crumb or two of honour, or he may try to delay and take his party down with him. So, Mr. Speaker, is it not clear that, with notable exceptions, his backbenchers should discover their backbones and sack him?
Look, Mr. Speaker, I've answered several questions like that, and I must really ask him to look at the report properly and also to wait for the inquiry when it comes.
Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've been asked to keep some sense of perspective, and I think that's right. The question here is whether those who make the law obey the law. That's pretty fundamental. Many have questioned, including some of my constituents, the Prime Minister's honesty and integrity and fitness to hold that office. Now, in judging him, he rightly asked us to wait for all the facts. Sue Gray has made it clear in her update today that she couldn't produce a meaningful report with the facts. So can I ask the Prime Minister the question that the Honourable Lady, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, asked him and to which he didn't give an answer? When Sue Gray produces all of the facts in her full report after the police investigation, will he commit to publish it immediately and in full?
Mr. Speaker, what we've got to do, Sue Gray, is wait for the police to conclude their inquiries, Mr. Speaker. That is the proper thing to do. People have given all sorts of evidence in the expectation that it would not necessarily be published, Mr. Speaker. At that stage, I will take a decision about what to publish, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I imagine that I'm going to be asked to wait for something else. But can I just simply ask the Prime Minister, was the Prime Minister present at the event in his flat on the 13th of November? I assume he doesn't need other people to tell him whether he was there or not. Was he at the flat event listed in the report on the 13th of November?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for inviting me to comment on something that is being investigated. But with great respect to her, I am simply not going to indulge in running commentary. She will have to wait, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Robert Butland.
Mr. Speaker, saying sorry is very important, but my right honourable friend will be judged by the deeds that he undertakes as a result. I heard today a proper acknowledgement that he needs to look in the mirror, and I'm glad to hear about reforms to the centre of government that I think are timely. In fact, they're overdue, as he knows from previous conversations I've had with him. But will he give me and the House this undertaking today, that in cooperating with the Metropolitan Police inquiry, he will show the appropriate tone and approach that I think the British public demand of him as a person of serious purpose who is up to the level of events. That's what we expect from him now, and that's what I'll be expecting him to do.
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I just want to stress, Mr. Speaker, that I have great admiration for the Metropolitan Police and full confidence in the police, and I just suggest that they be allowed now to get on with their job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We now know that there's a criminal investigation into the party that took place on the 13th of November 2020 in his flat to celebrate the exit of Mr. Cummings. On the 8th of December last year, he came to that dispatch box and flatly denied the very idea that any such party had taken place. He's shaking his head in answer to my honourable friend, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green. He said it had not happened. Now, he's inadvertently, Mr. Speaker, misled the House. So the very least he should do is get to that dispatch box and correct the record.
No, Mr. Speaker, I stand by what I said, and I would simply urge him to wait for the outcome of the inquiry. That's what he needs to do.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I advise my right honourable friend publicly what I have said to emissaries from his campaign team privately, that it is truly in his interest, in the government's interest, and in the national interest that he should insist on receiving the full, unredacted report immediately, as I believe he can, and that he should then publish the uncensored version without any further delay.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, but I think extensive legal advice has been taken on this point, and Sue Gray has published everything that she thinks she can that is consistent with that advice.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the police investigation were to result in serious criminal charges, necessitating a criminal trial, such as, I don't know, for example, misconduct in public office or conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, how would the Prime Minister feel about having to give evidence on oath?
Mrs. Speaker, I'm not going to speculate about hypothetical questions which, frankly, I reject.
Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, you will know that it's a very rare event for any Prime Minister to come to this House and apologise. A difficult thing for any Prime Minister to do. But on the issue of the police investigation, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there should be due process, that there should be free and unfettered access to all at number 10, but most of all, there should be no prejudging or undermining of the police inquiry before it's concluded?
Yes, I completely agree, and I must say I'm shocked by some of the commentary that I've heard from the benches opposite about that matter today, Mr. Speaker.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The thing is, this is who the Prime Minister is. A serious failure to observe high standards, failures of leadership and judgment, excessive consumption of alcohol in a professional workplace, gatherings that should not have been able to take place, staff too frightened to raise concerns, parties in his own private flat. A leopard doesn't change its spots, does it? Every single one who defends this will face this again and again and again, because he still won't even admit to the House that when he came to us on the 13th of November and said the guidance and the rules were followed at all times, and on the 1st of December that all the guidelines were observed, that those things simply were not true. If he won't correct the record today, there's nothing accidental about this, is there? It's deliberate.
I don't know what he's trying to say, Mr. Speaker, but look, I direct him again to the point made by Sue Gray that no conclusions should be drawn or inferences made from this other than it is now time for the police to consider the relevant material. And that is what the House should allow them, frankly, to do.
Shall Swallow?
Speaker, it is absolutely right that over the past few weeks, our constituents across the House have been writing to us on this hugely important issue. And I don't in any way wish to minimise its importance. But in my constituency, I have military bases. And I am receiving emails from families who are concerned about their loved ones and the potential role they may end up playing given the conflict on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Members opposite may treat this lightly, but families who have those serving in the military do not treat it lightly. Would my right honourable friend give me an assurance that, notwithstanding the importance of the issue that we are discussing at present, his government will start addressing other important matters that concern my constituents and the constituents of people across this House?
Thank him very much indeed, and I think he's completely right. Of course, these matters are important. We've got to wait for the inquiry, but in the meantime, the UK has got to play the leading role that we are, Mr. Speaker, in bringing the West together to make a united front against Vladimir Putin, particularly with the economic sanctions that we need, Mr. Speaker. That is the priority of the government right now.
Colin Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Prime Minister was eating birthday cake with his pals, people were standing outside nursing home windows looking in at their loved ones dying. And contrary to what the Prime Minister has said from that very dispatch box multiple times, any objective reading of Sue Gray's update makes it absolutely clear that the rules were broken multiple times in Downing Street. Will the Prime Minister continue a habit of a lifetime and keep blaming everybody else, or will he finally stand up, take responsibility and just go?
Mr. Speaker, he's really got to read the report. And he's got to look at the report, and he's got to wait. Mr. Speaker, everything he said, I'm afraid, is not substantiated by the report. He should look and wait for the police inquiry.
Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Millions of people took seriously a communications campaign apparently designed by behavioural psychologists to bully, to shame and to terrify them into compliance with minute restrictions on their freedom. What is my right honourable friend's central message to those people who meticulously complied with all of the rules and suffered terribly for it, including, I might say, those people whose mental health will have suffered appallingly as a result of the messages his government was sending out?
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all those people for everything that they did, because together they have helped us to control coronavirus, and I think thanks to their amazing actions in coming forward to get vaccinated, we're now in a far better position than many other countries around the world. So I have a massive debt of gratitude to all the people that he describes.
Then Diana Johnson.
Question asked by my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley. I'm not asking for a running commentary, but I would like to know whether the Prime Minister was present in his flat at the event on the 13th of November 2020.
I'm really grateful to him, Mr. Speaker, and I understand why people want me to elaborate on all sorts of points, but I am not going to make a running commentary on a matter that is now being considered by the authorities. I've got to wait for them to conclude.
Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the update that we have from Sue Gray today is, as she says herself, extremely limited, and that it is not possible at present to provide a meaningful report. So will my right honourable friend confirm that at the earliest opportunity he will have the report published in full?
Mr. Speaker, what we will do is wait until the police have concluded their inquiries and then see what more we can publish. That is what we're going to do.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister will recall, on the 8th of December in Prime Minister's Questions, I asked him, was there a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November? And now the report says, in the bullet point on the first page, that there was a gathering in the number 10 Downing Street flat, a gathering in the number 10 Downing Street on the departure of a special advisor. Did he inadvertently mislead this House, put us all out of our agony and stop dragging democracy through the mud?
Mr. Speaker, I stick by what I said to her, and she should wait. If she cares about democracy and due process, she should wait until the inquiry has been concluded.
Mark Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a non-drinker who long ago realised that sobriety delivers everything that alcohol promised, I've noticed with interest that a drinking culture exists in Downing Street and in fact predates my right honourable friend's tenure by some decades. Does he, like me, welcome Sue Gray's report, and will he commit to fixing that culture?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and we're certainly, Mr. Speaker, going to take up the relevant parts of her recommendations and see that they're properly enforced within the civil service and the SPAD code.
Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The shocking incompetence of the Met Police has meant that we have a report that has been gutted. But frankly, we didn't need Sue Gray to tell us about the level of dishonour and deception that has infected not only Downing Street, but so many in the party opposite. It has been excruciating to watch so many Tory MPs and ministers willing to defend the indefensible, calculating what's in their own party political interests rather than what's right for our country, complicit in the same decaying system where the pursuit of power trumps integrity. The Prime Minister is certainly a bad apple, but the whole tree is rotten and the whole country wants reform. Couldn't we make a start with a major overhaul of the ministerial code, given that its founding assumption that it could be policed by a Prime Minister of the day because they would be a person of honesty and integrity, that founding assumption has been so widely and comprehensively and utterly discredited.
Mr. Speaker, of all the things that she just... We are reforming the ministerial code, but of all the things that I disagree with her about and what she's just said, I disagree with her most passionately in what she's just said about the police. I think they do an outstanding job. I think we should allow them to get on with that job, and I will await their conclusions.
Thank you, Doyle Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I just draw attention to finding number 7 in this report, which documents that actually number 10 Downing Street has morphed from a small team in support of the Prime Minister to a self-indulgent bureaucracy all its own. And I personally am tired of reading Sunday newspapers which read officials briefing against ministers, delays by things being stuck in number 10 as I speak to ministers who are getting frustrated. So, could I ask my right honourable friend that as he institutes this review, call me old-fashioned, but ministers are accountable for decisions and that they're taken in their name, not flunkies in number 10, and will he ensure that reforms properly restore ministerial accountability?
Yes. I thank her very much, and I very much enjoyed our joint trip to Tilbury this morning, and I can tell her that, yes, I do think that it's vital, as Sue Gray says, that we learn from this and that we strengthen cabinet government and the principle of ministerial responsibility.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have spoken about my own experience of loss during the pandemic many times. I do not claim that my experiences are special. Indeed, they were all too common. But as a Member of Parliament, I have a responsibility to provide a voice for the bereaved families. Make no mistake, this report is utterly damning and suggests that the Prime Minister's and the government's actions were a risk to public health. How on earth can the Prime Minister stand there and justify this? Does he now accept that his actions were a complete and absolute failure of leadership and judgment?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and I repeat what I've said, that I am deeply sorry for all the suffering there's been throughout this pandemic, whether of his constituents or anyone in the country. As to his points about what is in the report, I don't think his views are substantiated by what the report says, but I think he should wait to see where the inquiry goes, and that's what I propose to do.
Suzanne Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable agree with me that those opposite have used far too much time, far too much parliamentary time debating this? And I can assure my right honourable friends that the residents of Stourbridge, they want the Prime Minister to focus on the matters that really they care about.
Just a moment. In fairness, the Prime Minister has to come and make the statement. No, I'm not going to attack the Prime Minister for making a statement. I certainly wouldn't expect from his own side, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think possibly what I want to say how strongly I agree with nonetheless with my honourable friend, because yes, of course, it's vital that we make this statement. Yes, of course, it's vital that we learn from Sue Gray's report, vital that we take action, Mr. Speaker, which is what the government is doing. But it's also vital, frankly, that we get on with the people's priorities, and that is what this government is also doing.
Christian Matheson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just to summarise, I didn't know there was a party. There was a party, but it was a work meeting, and there was a party, but I wasn't there. Why is it? The Prime Minister mentioned international negotiations. Why should anybody, any country, any government with whom we enter into negotiations deal at all and take any kind of word from a government that clearly acts with mendacity of forethought from start to beginning?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the government that took this country out of the EU, did what was necessary, and this is the government that is bringing the West together to stand up against Vladimir Putin. And those are the important considerations. As for the rest of what he said, Mr. Speaker, it's nonsense, but he should wait for the police inquiry.
Bobby Croft.
Speaker, my constituents in Scunthorpe are very keen to see the industrial energy prices fixed. Will the Prime Minister reassure me that he will not be distracted by any of this and that he will get on with the job and come forward with a solution to that issue?
Yes, I think my honourable friend is completely right. We not only need to address consumer energy costs, we need to address business and industrial energy costs as well. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be bringing forward a package of measures as soon as he can.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, during his statement, the Prime Minister kept referring to we when he talks about the sorry saga that Sue Gray has reported. But, Mr. Speaker, it's his rules, it's his rule breaking, it's his inability to tell the truth about it that's the issue. He is the Prime Minister. Does he not take any personal responsibility at all for this disgraceful fiasco?
Mr. Speaker, I've taken full responsibility throughout the pandemic.
Richard Fuller.
Speaker, as with the report on Owen Paterson, I felt it was important to support the process and read the report. And that's because I think it's important to separate fact from allegation and to know what the report actually says, rather than what I would wish it to say. Two lessons that the Leader of the Opposition needs to learn. I promised my constituents that I would ask the Prime Minister to say that he would support the recommendations in the report. There are 4. That every government department has a clear and robust policy in place covering the consumption of alcohol in the workplace. That access to the garden, including for meetings, should be invitation only and in a controlled environment. That there should be easier ways for staff to raise such concerns, basically whistleblowing, and that too much responsibility and expectation is placed on the senior official whose principal function is the direct support of the Prime Minister. Those are the facts and the findings of the report. Will the Prime Minister accept them in full?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do. And as I've said to the House earlier on, I accept the findings of the report in full, the general findings, and we are immediately taking steps to implement the changes.
Maria Riedel.
The Prime Minister's just said he accepts the findings of the report. One of them says that there were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10, the Cabinet Office, at different times. He provides the political leadership and the political judgment at Number 10. Does he accept his own personal wrongdoing and failings in this regard?
Mr. Speaker, not only have I accepted full responsibility throughout, but I have apologised repeatedly to the House for any misjudgments that I may have made myself. But again, I must urge her to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Aaron Bell.
It seems a lot of people attended events in May 2020. The one I recall attending was my grandmother's funeral. She was a wonderful woman. As well as a love for her family, she served her community as a councillor, and she served Dartford Conservative Association loyally for many years. I drove for 3 hours from Staffordshire to Kent. Only 10 people at the funeral. Many people who loved her had to watch online. I didn't hug my siblings. I didn't hug my parents. I gave a eulogy. And then, afterwards, I didn't even go to her house for a cup of tea. I drove back 3 hours from Kent to Staffordshire. Does the Prime Minister think I'm a fool?
No, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable friend, and I want to say how deeply I sympathise with him and his family for their loss. And all I can say is, again, that I'm very, very sorry for misjudgments that may be made by me or anybody else in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, and I can only ask him respectfully, Mr. Speaker, to look at what Sue Gray has said, but also to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that this House can trust what ministers tell us from that dispatch box. And on the 8th of December, regarding events at number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister said, "I repeat that I've been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. That is what I've been repeatedly assured." Now, the people who gave him those assurances led to him inadvertently misleading the House. So have those people faced any disciplinary proceedings?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, he needs to I'm afraid, to await the conclusions of the police inquiry, because I'm afraid the premise of his question may or may not be substantiated. But what I can tell the House is, yes, as I've said before, there certainly will be changes in the way we do things and changes in Number 10.
Duncan Baker.
Speaker, North Norfolk consistently had some of the lowest levels of infection in the country. We followed the rules. So many of my constituents have been incensed. The damage that this is doing to the government is enormous. It is about integrity and trust. Can I ask again, because people want to know, how can the Prime Minister now satisfy my constituents and assure me that full accountability and transparency on the findings of the final Gray report will swiftly follow?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will do whatever I can to ensure that this House has as much clarity as possible. There are legal issues that we face, Mr. Speaker, about some of the testimony that has been given. But in the meantime, what I think Sue Gray wants us to do is to wait for the conclusion of the investigation, of the inquiry, and to see where that goes, and to support the police in their work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister need somebody else to tell him whether he was there or he is there now?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the answer I've already given.
Sam Baines.
Mr. Speaker, we all recognise that number 10 Downing Street is an unusual amalgam of workplace, office space and private home. What steps will the Prime Minister take to ensure that the lines between each of them are made clearer in the future?
Mr. Speaker, you will see that there are a reference to that very problem in Sue Gray's report, and we're going to take steps, Mr. Speaker, to clarify things and to make sure there is greater transparency in the lines of command.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister recognise that repeatedly making statements, including from that dispatch box, which turn out subsequently to be untrue, is a serious problem? Or does he not recognise that?
Mr. Speaker, I really think he's prejudging things, and he should wait for the conclusion of the inquiries.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the fact that my right honourable friend has come to this House as a first step in responding to this report. He's also rightly outlined that the relationship between Number 10 and this House needs to improve. So will he reassure me that he'll continue to come to this House to update us on the implementation of the recommendations in Sue Gray's report and how that will happen?
Mr. Speaker, I will, of course, I'm only too happy to assure the House that we intend to make changes starting from now, and I will